Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. On behalf of the European Commission and the European Jewish Congress, we are very happy to welcome you for this important event marking International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We would like first to express our deep gratitude to our guest of honor, Tomi Reichental, for being with us today and for accepting to share his painful memories and life story. As a survivor of Bergen-Belsen, one of Germany's most horrifying concentration camps, Tomi will tell us about his experience of the Holocaust as a young boy, one who ultimately managed to rebuild his life in Ireland, his home for over 60 years. After the opening remarks of Margaritis Schinas, European Commission Vice President for promoting our European way of life, and an address by Moshe Cantor, President of the European Jewish Congress, Tomi will engage in a conversation with Vice President Schinas that I will have the pleasure to moderate. Before giving you the floor, Vice President Schinas, I would like to thank you and the European Commission on behalf of the European Jewish Congress and all Jewish communities of Europe for the concrete measures and initiatives taken over the last few years to combat anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial. The appointment of Katharina von Schnurbein as European Commission Coordinator on Combating Anti-Semitism in 2015 and the enlargement of her team under your leadership, as well as the organization of regular, dedicated working groups involving representatives of Jewish communities and member states, were instrumental to achieve tangible progress on the ground. So thank you very much, Vice President, and the floor is yours.
Dear friends, joining us from Brussels, Ireland, Israel, and across Europe, it is a great honor to welcome you to this virtual gathering to remember the millions of Jewish people and the many other victims of the Shoah, the darkest moment in our recent European history. This year, especially against the backdrop of the pandemic, we are all asked to find new forms of remembrance. The spread of the virus has profoundly affected our societies, and it has taken a heavy toll on human lives. It is a painful reminder of the importance of keeping the memory and the lessons of the Shoah alive, because we also lost, unfortunately, due to the pandemic, many survivors as well. And keeping the memory of the Shoah alive is probably more urgent now than ever before. We need to be aware of how incredible a privilege is for our generation to be able to listen to the first-hand accounts of those who directly experienced and witnessed the tragedy of the Holocaust, and still, like Mr. Reichental, find the courage to share their stories. I am humbled and honored to share this virtual forum with Mr. Tomi Reichental. And I would like also to sincerely thank the European Jewish Congress for making this unique conversation possible. We have a duty to listen, to remember, but also a duty to act. Act decisively against anti-Semitism in contemporary times. Over the past months, we have seen a highly worrying rise in conspiracy myths, Holocaust denial, and distortion, especially online. We saw anti-Semitic conspiracies around the origin of the virus, shocking comparisons of victimhood, with some anti-vaxxers wearing a yellow star with the word unacceptable or unvaccinated on it. Holocaust trivialization is dangerous, be it with malign intent or as a result of ignorance. Conspiracy myth and conspiracy theories were, after all, one of the reasons that led to the final solution and the terror of the Shoah. Research shows that a third of Europeans today know just a little about the Holocaust. 1 in 20 even has never heard of it. And teaching the facts of the Holocaust is essential, more essential than ever. Awareness-raising campaigns, fostering dialogue around anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, especially among young Europeans, is particularly important. I was very pleased to see the European Jewish Congress teaming up with social media platforms for the Stop This Story campaign. And from the side of the Commission, we are also joining forces with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, UNESCO, and the United Nations to protect the facts campaign against distortion. And as of this year, we have tripled our budget for actions dedicated to Holocaust remembrance, education, and research. But we are not stopping there. Over the past months, together with the German presidency of the Council, we put the fight against anti-Semitism firmly high up on the European Union's political agenda. On the 2nd of December last year, in a landmark decision, the Council of Ministers adopted a Council declaration by which our member states, all 27 of them, unanimously agree to step up efforts on mainstreaming measures against anti-Semitism across all relevant policy areas in the European Union. And this year, I'm very happy to announce that we will present from the Commission the first ever European strategy on combating anti-terrorism and fostering Jewish life to support and complement our member states' efforts. Holocaust remembrance, education, and research will be central pillars of this new strategy, next to addressing, of course, security concerns and positively and actively supporting Jewish life and tradition. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that the task ahead of us is complex. We know that uprooting a centuries-old hatred demands sustained efforts over time, from the local to the national and the international level. But we here in Europe, we are determined to fight, and we are determined to win this fight. We owe it to those who perished in the Holocaust. We owe it to the survivors of the Holocaust. And we also owe it to the generations to come. Thank you.
Can't hear you.
You have to unmute, Ariana, you have to unmute your mic.
Sorry, this is my fault. I didn't want to interrupt you, you see. Thank you very much, Vice President, for reaffirming once again the strong commitment of the European Commission. I mentioned these concrete measures, and we are welcoming very much the strategy on which we are working on. So thank you again on behalf of all of us. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce the President of the European Jewish Congress, Dr. Moshe Cantor, who dedicates his life and spares no effort to combat anti-Semitism and preserve the memory of the Shoah.
Dear Commissioner Schinas, dear Tomi, Reichental, and our dear Holocaust survivors, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you all for joining us here to remember the 6 million men, women, and children who were murdered in the Shoah by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. Exactly 1 year ago, we gathered together with around 50 world leaders at the World Holocaust Forum in Jerusalem. Over there, we made a joint commitment to ensure that the horrors of the Holocaust are never forgotten and to tackle extremism of any kind through real political engagement, legislation, education, and joint actions by governments and civil society. It was an event like no other, in the city like no other, to remember an evil like no other. Who would have imagined that just 1 year from that day, the fragility of humanity could be so exposed that even the smallest physical contact would be prevented from us, and that only technology could join our thoughts and prayers together. COVID-19 has damaged our perceptions of what is possible in so many ways. We have all been lost during the current pandemic, but the survivors of the Holocaust even more so. Throughout their lives, they have shown mighty strength of spirit, but in current crisis, many have sadly died alone and in pain, or are now fighting for their lives, and many others are suffering from extreme isolation. Tomi, a survivor, put it best in the New York Times: "The Holocaust stole my youth. COVID-19 is stealing my last years." We have a duty to survivors like her to ensure that they are able to live their last years in dignity, without fear, and in the company of their loved ones. Therefore, I call on European leaders to ensure that Holocaust survivors have access as soon as possible to a safe and effective vaccination, and with the highest priority. As we pay tribute to the victims of the biggest tragedy in history, we must not forget the fundamental lesson that in times of crisis, extremism can rise rapidly. The pandemic has created the social conditions where anti-Semitism and extremism thrive. The human mind, like the human body, is fragile to mutating viruses, and so our democracies and our shared values of human rights and freedoms. We have a responsibility to prevent the spread of hate speech and conspiracy theories, and I am pleased that the European Union and member states are finally addressing this new threat by recognizing that anti-Semitism needs to be fought across all policy areas. The European Jewish Congress and our Jewish communities welcome very much these initiatives. But I fear this may be too late for some. If you enable the spread of hatred into young minds, it will grow in a few years into the cruelty of action. We are already seeing social unrest and increasing political division across the world. We must not only tackle the effect, but also seriously address the cause and to take action to prevent this. This means a continuous process of education from a young age and education about the Holocaust. And this is the task that our speaker, Tomi Reichental, has dedicated his life to. He has told his story to thousands of people, even though putting the painful memories into words is each time a painful act. He has done this to keep the memory of Shoah alive. Dear Tomi, your story is one of incredible strength, resilience, and compassion, and I am honored that you are here with us at this commemoration. 6 million children, women, and men perished in the Shoah. I mention this figure again so that we understand the enormity of the Shoah and what this tragedy symbolizes for my people and for all of Europe. Please remember this number. Almost half of member states of European Union currently have a smaller population than 6 million. Thank you very much.
We thank Dr. Cantor for his message and especially for reminding us of the importance to protect and cherish our Holocaust survivors who safeguard the memory of this unique tragedy for humanity. And before starting our conversation with Tomi Reichental and Vice President Schinas, we will screen a short excerpt of Close to Evil, an award-winning documentary about Tomi's life and mission.
I am confident that no human person on this earth will ever be able to describe adequately the sufferings and horrors that these poor wretches underwent.
We were in open lorries and we could follow our nose to the entrance of the camp. We started to count the bodies and we gave up after 6,000. 6,000.
All these deaths have been caused by systematic starvation and typhus and disease because of the treatment meted out to these poor people by their SS guards.
Ich weiß selbst nicht, wie ich das überlebt habe, ich weiß es nicht. Ich habe nur gemerkt, dass ich immer wieder Glück hatte. Also das ahnten wir nicht. Das ahnten wir überhaupt nicht von Todesstrafe.
And so they lie, cheek to cheek, in a common grave. We shall never know who they were. We only know they were born, they suffered, and died in agony in Belsen camp.
My name is Tomi Reichental. I'm from Slovakia. I first landed on these shores in 1959. I hardly spoke any English. I came to open a zip factory. I fell in love, got married, and raised 3 sons. Dublin has been my home ever since. As a boy, I was a prisoner in Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. For over 50 years, I couldn't talk about what I saw and went through. 6 million people like me were murdered in the Shoah. Among the victims were 35 members of my family. I'm here not because who I am, but because what I am. I am a survivor of the Holocaust and one of the last witnesses to this horror that happened not long ago. Twice a week I go to schools all over Ireland. I force myself to remember the past. I owe it to the dead to tell my story. When I went my first day to school, I had to wear the yellow star On my left side, it was about the size as I have it here. And in the middle was written Jew. Now I'm able to face my ghosts. Whenever I can, I talk about my experiences.
It was the German philosopher Theodor Adorno who wrote, "After Auschwitz, no more poetry." Similar shocked reactions were felt when other concentration camps revealed the unspeakable atrocities committed by the Nazis against the Jewish people. Tomi, do you recall the actual moment of liberation?
Yes, there was no dancing or jubilation because 90% of the prisoners were sick.
Most of the people seemed to be listless beyond hope and astonishment. They seemed accustomed to the smell and the horror. They had seen all there was to see.
After the radio program, a listener got in touch with me, confidentially. I discovered that one of the SS guards from Bergen-Belsen is still alive. Her name is Hilda. She is now a 92-year-old widow. Her married name is Mcnair. I am one of her former prisoners. In 2004, she gave an interview to the Bergen-Belsen Museum. It has never been seen in public.
Als Sie die Uniform dann gekriegt haben, erinnern Sie sich daran, wie das so war, jetzt in Uniform?
Da war ich stolz. Ich mochte ja auch Männer in Uniform, nicht? Also die Uniform hat mir gefallen. Aber es war auch alles.
The person who contacted me is a close friend of the SS woman. The listener believes Hilda Mcnair is prepared to meet me. After some consideration, I agree. I know it will bring me back to a past we share. Me the victim, she the perpetrator. These are some of the SS women that kept us in captivity, and you can see Hilda here. On the day that the tables were torn, we got liberated by the British, and Hilda became their prisoner of war.
I swore after the liberation never to put my foot on German soil again. Never. And we didn't speak German. German was out of my life completely. But hatred is such a poison. It poisons you, it poisons everybody around you. We have to build bridges, otherwise we can't get any further in life.
Yes, it's a bit difficult to speak after this very moving excerpt. But Tomi, I suggest we will begin our conversation. And of course, Vice President, intervene at any moment, please. So Tomi, my first question to you. We can only imagine how infernal the life was in Bergen-Belsen. What helped you survive during your time in the camp as a small boy? And how did you maintain hope?
Hello, Ariella. Before I start, it is a great honor and privilege to be here and participating in the commemoration remembrance, the International Remembrance Day. It's a great privilege. For this, I would like to thank the European Jewish Congress and of course the European Commission for inviting me and participating and speaking about the horror of the Holocaust. Before I speak about it, I would like to welcome my brother Mickey in Israel, and all the rest of family, my partner Joyce, that are participating and watching this program, and also, of course, my many friends that I have all over the world, in Germany, America, Slovakia, England, and Dublin. I'm welcoming them, and also my son who lives in United States, England, and here in Dublin. So it is a great pleasure to be here and begin our program commemorating the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Well, when you speak about the hell that we went through, it's no book, no film, cinema can ever portray the suffering and the time that we experienced in Belgium. The horror that I saw as a child at the time did not, I was unable to really properly understand what was happening around me. But it's such a strong memory that it took over 55 years before I ever began to speak about it. And I remember that it was about 20 years ago, maybe even more, when the first time we began to speak among ourselves, my brother, my cousin Chava, and myself, about our experiences. And the first thing we said, how did we survive this torture that went for weeks and months during the time in the Belgian concentration camp? Because it's you can't describe it in words what we went through. And you're asking me, how did we survive? We didn't live for future in Belgian. We didn't talk what we're going to do in a week time or in a month's time. We talked about the day we survived. Tomorrow is another day. There wasn't any special bullet that I can say, this is how I survived. But there are a couple of things that I can think why we survived. First of all, was this, we were all together. My grandmother, my aunt, my cousin, my mother, my brother, and myself. And we kept very much together and supported each other. I never forget when my mother, in the evening before I went to bed or when I was in bed, she would say to me, we will survive, just keep strong. Tomorrow we survive as well. So it was something, the support among ourselves, that was keeping us going. My aunt, Margot, she was a very strong character. My mother was a very strong character. They never showed sadness. They always smiled. They always gave us this hope that it's all right. But thankfully, we did survive.
Thank you very much, Tomi. And indeed, we realize that each story of survival is a miracle in itself. So you must have had a miracle, you know, every day that you survived Bergen-Belsen, it was a miracle. And we are so thankful that you are here with us today to be able to tell, you know, your story. Vice President, maybe you would like to reflect on Tomi's story.
Well, Mr. Reichental's story provokes to me a deepest sense of respect and admiration. It's a story of perseverance, but also a story of courage and magnanimity. I come from a city, Thessaloniki, in northern Greece, who's also known as the Mother of Israel. And we lost 50,000 of my fellow Thessalonians in the camps, and 90% of the Jewish community, of a Sephardic community that has been with us for centuries. So these are stories that I am familiar with, and these are stories that basically bring three main messages in my mind. First, that we human beings are able to heal, and Mr. Reichental is a living example of this process of overcoming, of reaching out not only to fellow survivors, but only to the Nazis, the collaborators, or even those who chose to be bystanders. This is important. This healing process, I think, it is important. Another thing which is clearly very important is that we must speak up. We must speak up to silence those denying the Holocaust, to react against those who choose to ignore, but also attack and rebut all these conspirationists and those spreading fake news through the platforms, trying to undo history or create their own history around the Holocaust. And finally, I think what is also important is that we need to focus on young Europeans. Young Europeans should be our priority, our focus groups. Schools, universities, NGOs, civil society. Young Europeans do not fully know what was a stain in Europe's history. And this is a story that needs to be told. And we hear from the Commission through these campaigns, but also the work of the associations and the survivors, I think, should privilege the youth track. This is where lots of time and effort will need to be deployed in the months and the years to come.
Thank you, Vice President. Indeed, you mentioned the younger generation, and I think Tomi understands that more than anyone. He said that he doesn't refuse any invitation to speak in any school whenever he is asked to do so. And I think over the last years, you have talked to thousands and thousands of students in universities and also schools. And I would like, Tomi, that you share with us a little bit, you know, about this experience of talking in schools. What did you learn from these students? That will be my first question. And maybe a more difficult one, because this is something that we witness now, especially in Western Europe, that it is more and more difficult to teach about the Shoah, about the Holocaust in schools. And I would like to ask you if you have encountered more difficulty over the last years to talk about the Shoah? Did you receive some negative reactions from some school pupils? It would be interesting for us to know.
Well, to put a figure on how many students I spoke to, I can really quote that here in Ireland, I spoke to whole generations. I record all my meetings that I do, and it is around 120,000 that I directly met and did my presentation. So if you take 120,000 students, they told their friends, they told the parents. So here in Ireland, I would imagine very big chunk of the population heard about me. I appeared on television and radio many times, being interviewed. So here in Ireland, I mean, the figure would be much higher that heard about me and my story. Not only this, there was a brochure printed out with my story. So in part, and it was distributed in all the schools in Ireland. So part of my story is part of the education curriculum in Ireland in the schools. And so it is very well known. My experience is very good. I never get a question or contradiction of any kind. But I have to say, of course, my story is a true story. Every bit of it that I wrote in the book, I checked and rechecked with when I was writing it with my brother and with my cousin. And of course, I wrote the book 6 years later. So there are a little bit memory discrepancies. So when I ask of any incidents that I'm describing in the book from my brother and cousin, it was a little bit different between three of us, but I used the one that was more agreeable between us. So the story is very authentic, and it was compliment when I sent a copy to Bergen-Belsen archive when they said to me that your book is very authentic, and we hope that the English-speaking people that will read the book will learn and realize that everything is true. My experience in giving the lecture is very good, and the teacher love me when I come to the school and give my presentation, because they can never teach the children as well as when I speak, because they're getting the authentic story, what the Holocaust really was. But as I mentioned before, no lecture or books or film can really portray what it was really like. It is something that is so unbelievable that it's hardly to describe it. And I would like to use this platform to say to the doubters, and if any of the deniers are looking on this, believe me, the Holocaust did happen. I was there. I suffered. I saw it and experienced the horror of the Holocaust. So when I hear sometimes this denial with the stories, they're not denying the Holocaust. They are simply anti-Semite people that would like to harm us. But if there are any doubters, I want to stress the Holocaust did happen.
Thank you, Tomi. I think your testimony is the best, weapon that we have. And unfortunately, that the fact that we still need to use this weapon, your direct testimony is extremely sad, and which leads to my next question to Vice President Schinas. I mean, Tomi's life, at least the last 20 years, because you said it took you 50 years to talk about it, was dedicated to speak out and to share your testimony. And I would like to ask Vice President, what does Holocaust remembrance and education mean to the European project and to European values? Because this is your portfolio. In other words, how can we as a society pursue Tomi's vital mission, which is also our mission?
Well, in a way, the European Union project came about precisely as a result of the horrors of the Second World War. It was like building something new for the winners and the losers of the war on the ashes of the World War II and the horrors that went through it, including, of course, the Holocaust. And it was an idea, let's face it, of reconciliation based on a rather simple premise that we Europeans managed to sort of attack each other twice in the last century, in a very short period of, 25, 30 years. And the lesson of this conflict is that in Europe, we are the only ones who have the privilege to know what happens when the forces of evil win the day. In other parts of the world, we can only speculate. But in Europe, we saw this movie until the bitter end. So we know how this story ends. So in a way, the history of the European Union, the beginning of the European Union, and the almost 70 years of peace and prosperity and mutual coexistence that followed is a good thing coming out of a very bad thing. Now, if you ask me, how can we translate this continuous process of understanding each other, living with each other, bearing all the problems of the past, and especially when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism, I think that I would counsel against a simple policy response, because we are in front of a very complex equation, and the policy response has to be multidimensional. There are many different things that we need to do. Of course, awareness raising is key, but also we need to address issues of inclusion, of interfaith dialogue, of security, because there is a security issue that needs to be addressed to protect our Jewish communities in Europe. There is education that needs to be built not only through visits, but also within our curricula, the way we teach our history to young Europeans. And we also need to combine resources, research, money. So these different elements will have to be the pieces of the overall puzzle of a European strategy against anti-Semitism. We have done, as you rightly said, Ariella, at the beginning, we have done considerable, we have taken steps of progress, considerable steps of progress ahead, but we're not yet there. And this is not a one-off process. This is not a sprint. is a marathon. We need to have a sustained effort, a comprehensive strategy, bringing together these different strands of work. And we are confident, as I was saying in my opening remarks, we are confident that we will be able to win this fight.
Thank you very much, Vice President, not only for reminding us of the foundation of the European project, which are very dear to us, as you can imagine. And the various components that you mentioned also show us that we are not only here to talk about the past, but definitely to address, the challenges of the future. And unfortunately, we have many. You mentioned, Vice President, the fact that we need also the European project for reconciliation. That was also one of the reasons why we created the European Union. And this is this mission of searching for reconciliation. This is something that Tomi also searched for, this reconciliation. And this will lead me to my next question, Tomi. In the movie, we saw that you wanted to reach out to Hilda, one of the SS guards at Bergen-Belsen. And we would like to understand also, what were you looking for? Were you looking for an acknowledgement of guilt, or were you looking for some remorse or an apology? What were you looking for, and how did it happen? Did you finally meet her? Can you please tell us more about this episode?
Yeah, the story of Hilda Mcnair in the film is quite a story. And the way it happened was that one day I got a phone call from a lady here in Ireland that lived in Germany for 25 years. She befriended Hilda Mcnair. Her original name was Hilda Lisievich. And as you can imagine, when she rang me and told me that she had something for me from Hilda that she got, I was very interested. What she had was the interview that she gave to the Bergen-Belsen archive. It's an interview that was about over 3 hours, and then there was a disc also of her picture as she was in the SS uniform when she received her acceptance into the SS group, which was, of course, the most respected in the German army. And I began to be very interested in Hilda, not for particular reason at the time, but the fact that she served in Bergen-Belsen. And as you can imagine, I gathered information from her childhood till today, practically. I knew everything about her. And what struck me most was that Hilda gave not only interview to the Bergen-Belsen archive, but to historian, to student. I read some of the text, and in none of these interviews she ever regretted or apologized or anything that she was involved with. And then I thought that I would like to meet her. I would like to meet her, not to talk about the past. The intention was honorable. I had no wish to put her in a situation. I didn't want to speak about the past. It was about her today, and to find out if after 75 years she could, well, it was only 70 years when I met her, a little bit over 70 years, if she's able to tell me that she regretted. I thought she obviously must have realized what she was involved was terrible, and if she regretted or if she will apologize. So that was the idea, and I stressed this to her daughter, that I have no interest to speak about the past or about Bergen-Belsen. I like to know her opinion today, if she can realize that what happened was wrong. And everything was set up that we will meet, and it was during the time that we were talking about. I mentioned it all to my film producer, Jerry Gregg. And Jerry said, you know, Tommy, if you're going to do this, I want to be present there. I want to film this meeting, because it would have been something very unusual, something that probably never happened before. I know Holocaust survivor met a perpetrator, but it used to be in a setting of a trial or something, but not as a private meeting. So I mentioned this then with her daughter, and I mentioned that will it be all right, and they even made the arrangement that the actual meeting will be maybe just recorded, the camera doesn't need to be there. And it was sort of agreed that we will do it. But on our way, we were filming in Israel as well, in Yad Vashem and a couple of other places with some witnesses. And on the way to Hamburg to go to interview Hilda, in the airport in Israel, we received a message that she's not able to meet me, she's too sick, all kind of excuses. As it happened, we were there, so we continue our trip, and we were able to film her in Hamburg without knowledge when she was going out of the house and things. So she wasn't ill or anything. She just didn't want to meet me. What was the reason? I would imagine that when she gave the interviews to the archive, to the student, to the historian, she could tell them anything, but she knew that she can't tell this to me because I was in Bergen-Belsen, and probably this what she was afraid of, that I might ask her thing, and she can't deny them. Anyway, the case was that I didn't meet her, but since then we found out, of course, that she said a lot of lies in these interviews, things that were absolutely absurd. One of them was that she told to the Bergen-Belsen archive when they asked her that she knows about the dead bodies. I mean, in Bergen-Belsen around us, there were about 15,000 corpses lying around, decomposing and rotting away. The stench was unbearable. And when they asked her about this, she said she never smelled anything, and she can't understand how Joseph Kramer, who was the commander of Bergen-Belsen, he was an assessment. He first served in Auschwitz. He was the man looking after the gas chamber in Auschwitz and throwing the cyclone poison into the gas chamber. And she said, I can't understand why Joseph Kramer brought all these bodies here to Bergen-Belsen. In other words, she was denying even that these corpses were corpses of inmates of Bergen-Belsen. So she was a liar and a denier of the Holocaust. So perhaps that I didn't meet her at the time was good, because I was prepared if she would have said I'm sorry, or even I didn't want to hear that she says sorry, but to say that it was wrong and acknowledge that horror that they committed in all this concentration camp. And I can tell you, in Bergen-Belsen, the women were worse than the men. Actually, Hilda was accused of killing 2 people, but even the killing wasn't the main problem, because these the inmates of Bergen-Belsen, they were only skeleton. You didn't need to use a lot of force to kill somebody. That they were already half dead anyway. But knowing from where Hilda came, she came from a broken family. Her father was an alcoholic. Her mother worked. She was a very primitive person, and from the age of 12, she joined the Hitlerjugend, the girls' Jugend, and she was fed this propaganda and lies all her life. And when she was in Bergen-Belsen as SS, she had tremendous power there, and unfortunately she used it. So it was a little bit naive of me, but I thought she was also a victim of her time, like we were a victim of that time.
Tomi, you were not naive. It was quite admirable and quite courageous. And as you said, you are one of the last survivors. She's one of the last living, former SS, and she still refused to reach out to you. And this is quite, symptomatic of some, Germans of that generation who could never face the truth and would continue to distort and lie till the end of their days, very unfortunately. So now, unfortunately, time is running out, so I would like to ask Vice President to give us some concluding words. And I know that Tomi wanted to end with a beautiful, very short poem from Yehuda Bauer, so I will leave the floor to the two of you.
Thank you. I think what we witnessed this afternoon speaks for itself. It's a fantastic opportunity to make people remember, but also look at the past with a certain force and with a certain capacity to overcome and reach out to everybody. I think this is unique, especially from a generation that suffered so much. And in itself, it's also a lesson for the younger generations of Europeans. When it comes to policy making and how we can fight anti-Semitism by deploying policy instruments, I would like to reiterate what I said earlier, that we are making progress. There is now a growing awareness, both at national and European level, on the need to carry forward with these efforts. We have already, in a number of member states, as a result of our work, national plans for fighting anti-Semitism that are being elaborated at a national level, but discussed at the European level in a working group that brings together member state administrations, organizations, Jewish organizations, and the European Commission. We will have the comprehensive strategy next year, which would be later this year, in September, October, which will be a landmark opportunity. We have financial support, which is now considerably increased to work for better education and also better documentation of the facts around anti-Semitism. And more than anything else, I think we now know where we need to concentrate our efforts. We need to concentrate on young Europeans, and we need to activate these different streams of work I was referring to earlier. There is no magic bullet. There is no one shot to get this right. We are obliged to activate and work across the policy spectrum. And I'm delighted in my capacity as Vice President of the Commission in charge of steering the work against anti-Semitism that I have to support of all my colleagues from these different policies to engage with me to bring forward this change. We all know the famous saying that those who ignore history are condemned to repeat it, and we are not ready to make this mistake again. We will continue keeping the memories alive. We will continue talking, explaining, and engaging. And I personally hope that we will have many, many more opportunities to discuss with people of the generation of Tomi Reichental for many, many years to come. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Vice President. As we say in our tradition, until 120 years old. So this is the minimum we wish to Tomi Reichental.
Much beyond that, I would say this is too short, much beyond that.
Tomi, you told me that you would like to end this event with a poem that is dear to you. So please, Tomi, go ahead, and then we will end with a minute of silence to pay tribute to all the victims of the Holocaust. Please.
Before I read the poem, I just want to add that Hilda is still alive, and on the 31st of January, she will be 99 years old.
So she still has an opportunity to come back to her senses.
Yes, well, yeah. Anyway, I like to read this poem because it's very appropriate to the theme that we were talking about. And I hope people will appreciate it. It was written by Hilda in 2001. The horror of Holocaust is not that it deviated from the human norm. The horror is that it didn't. What happened might happen again to others, not necessarily Jews, perpetrated by others, not necessarily German. They are all possible victims, possible perpetrators, but possible bystanders.
Thank you, Tomi, for these very wise words from Hilda Bauer. I would like to end now the ceremony with a minute of silence, and I thank you very much to you both for being with us this afternoon, and to all the people who have joined us. And of course, I invite you all to watch the full documentary about Tomi and his life, Close to Evil. It's a tremendous, remarkable documentary. Thank you very much to all of you. Thank you very much.